at some point between the 13th century and today,
Yeah.
somebody said, "This is boring. I'm going to do this instead." Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marching Arts Podcast, your guide to all things marching. Um, we're happy to have you today. Excited to have a special guest with us. This is Dr. Meals. He teaches at the University of Houston. He has had a long history in band, has taught at several different levels, assistant band director and professor of music education at Kennesaw State University. Also is a public school band director in Waller, Klein, and Keller school districts. Has an established history in the marching arts as both an instructor for numerous groups, specifically in the Drum Corps International World, the Cavaliers, Santa Clara Vanguard, and the Boston Crusaders as a visual designer, as well as a visual designer for groups across North America. He is a wonderful individual. We're excited to have him. Me and James both met him when we started at Kennesaw State University, and boy, am I excited to have this conversation with you, Dr. Meals. How are you?
I am well, and thank you both for the invitation. It's awesome to get to see you again, and it's awesome to see you doing this project, like looking at the marching arts in a more in depth way. Like it's really cool, and I'm excited to chat with you guys about all things nerdy pageantry arts.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
we just can't shut up about it. So we thought, why don't we just start a podcast where we literally give ourselves a chance to not shut up about it and invite as many people as we can?
Exactly. You are on the outside, what I am on the inside. This is a good day for that.
Right.
so to kind of give us a little more of introduction into
Mhm.
yourself outside of just what a bio says about you, kind of what people want to know, what got you into the marching arts, as you like to say, way back in the day, but
Yes.
what got you into the marching arts?
Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. It's ancient. I appreciate the emphasis on my long history and the activity. So honestly, it's a really simple answer to a really complex thing. And the reason why I'm in this at all, in marching arts and really music education in a lot of ways, boils down to my father. My dad marched in the Cavaliers in 1967, so many moons ago, and kind of had it in his head when he had a son. I'm the firstborn of my family, that his son would also march in the Cavaliers. And forever I was like, no, Dad, I'm not going to be good enough. Or when I started marching in a little drum and bugle corps called Lake Erie Regiment, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm better now, but like I can maybe make Phantom Regiment. I can never do the Cavaliers. Like that's not going to happen, Dad. And he cajoled me in 1997 to go out and audition, and the rest, so to speak, is history. I actually got cut from the Corps. My first camp, I was 14 out of 12 mellophones they were going to take, but I was advised by older people, it's like, just show up again. People, for whatever reason, don't come back because of money or whatever. You'll probably get in. And sure enough, I would believe I was number 10 out of 12 that first year. So by the skin of my teeth. But really, it all comes back to my dad going, "You're going to do this thing because I want you to do it. I did it. I saw value in it." And clearly I saw value in it too because I have not left. They can't make me leave yet. So it's a good thing, and I've had a lot of great teachers along the way, but it all boils down to my father.
Well, awesome, and I think that, James, that's a good point for us because we, on a different episode, we talked about, what brings people into band, whether it be they joined because of friends or they joined because of, personal, you know, what word am I looking for? Personal ambition.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
but in this case, I mean, your dad was like, "You're doing this,"
Pretty much.
You got
but
to
I
keep
guess it
that
stuck,
legacy going.
And I mean,
right?
I know I'm kind of an outlier in that because,
Hmm.
having been a band director as long as I have, it's pretty rare. It's not never happening, but it's a rarity to find people who are legacies, kind of to keep the
Right.
tradition going, like James just said. And that kind of puts me in a weird place because I have these different set of expectations and different set of ways to interact with the thing, being marching band and the experience of it, than a kid who just wants to do it because their friends did it or did it because it's like, oh, this is something I can be good at, that isn't really like I'm just naturally good at this and it's going to take me as far as I want to go. That's one way of interacting. I kind of came in with a little bit of the playbook, knowing like, oh, I should expect these sorts of things. But nonetheless, I was still molded and shaped by the experience in ways that couldn't be predicted or couldn't be really kind of anticipated in a what kind of kid am I going into this, even if
Right.
with my father being the in loco parentis.
So with you like taking the legacy like all the way like through the highest level, you could say of marching arts, like at what point were you did your mentality switch from like I'm doing this because my dad wants me to and to where you're like, man, I really love this?
Honestly, pretty early on. I'm zooming back even further, I was in my high school marching band, the Titusville High School Rocket Marching Band. We can get in later sometime why they're called the Rockets, but their colors of the school were brown and gold. Just kind of let that image marinate for you. It's brown and gold marching band uniforms in the middle of Pennsylvania, um, and so I was okay at that. Like I wasn't terrible. And so I enjoyed that because it's like, oh, this is something I can do that I'm better than other people at. So there's that aspect too. But then when I started to do drum corps, kind of when I was a little bit older, I think I started when I was 14. And it was like, oh, this is a challenge. This is hard, but it's hard in a way that I somehow seem to be able to wrap my arms around. So let's just keep doing it and see how far we can push. And pushed it all the way to, winning DCI 5 times total in my career with Cavaliers, winning INEs and doing kind of not maxing out everything you can do, but maxing out a lot of the things you can do in the drum corps activity. Never really touched indoor, never really touched that side of things, but as far as the outdoor, band on grass aspect of things, I was able to take it pretty far, and it was due in large part again to my father supporting me, but also the great teachers I had along the way.
You just like
Awesome.
nonchalantly like brought up, oh, I won 5 championships as if
Oh,
like anybody
by
does.
the way,
I mean, I'm very fortunate to have been with the Cavaliers when I was. And I mean, my first year, we were seventh. Like, that was the lowest we had placed since the 70s or early 80s. And, to be a part of that transition too was formative. Like, going from really not super well put together in terms of performance ability, because we had like 90 rookies out of 128 people in 1997. So
Wow.
that's a recipe for disaster right there. That we were only seventh is kind of a merciful thing, to winning DCI, back to back 2000, 2001, and then going on staff in 2002 and being part of that whole thing. Like, it was a diametric shift that was really interesting to watch. And now looking back, I can see a lot of the things that I take as an educator having shown up in my experience there as a performer that I kind of like backwards engineered to figure out how to set it up as a teacher too.
and there's a lot of different ways that you can bend it. I mean, we've talked before about how you can kind of classify in a way that in high school when you're first getting it, or eighth grade, depending on how it starts for you, that marching band kind of at that level is more of an introductory, and then as you get into a um, your upperclassmen kind of range, you're at kind of that mid level where you have to decide whether or not you're going to go into college to go to pursue a higher level, and then thus as we consider it, DCI being more of the professional level of marching. What, with your experience and everything that and your dad pushing you to get involved, and something that we both know you're very passionate about, um, what was a driving factor for you to stick at the collegiate level to win for education?
So that's a really good question. And honestly, I wasn't going to be a band director at first. I wanted to be an English teacher. I love reading. I love books. Clearly, I like know too many words. So like all that stuff amassed into like, I want to do English. I really like literature. But then I figured out I'd have to teach grammar, and that's not really a starter for me. Like, I can't really diagram a sentence. My wife's fantastic at it. I am clueless still to this day. I have a PhD and can't do it. But it was like, oh, but I like teaching. I like this mechanism of like helping someone get better at something and giving them information they don't have and watching them kind of have that light bulb moment. So I was like, well, what can I do with that? So I'll be a band director. And the school I actually got into, that I went to, was Vandercook College of Music, which interestingly does not have a marching band. Doesn't even have a football team. It's attached to a school called Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a pretty big like STEM school on the south side of Chicago, right by Comiskey Park, or whatever they call where the White Sox play now. Maybe U.S. Cellular Field, or I
Yeah,
don't know.
that
It's
one.
always going to be Comiskey to me. Um,
You got it.
and so that actually afforded me the opportunity to grow as a teacher in a way I wouldn't have if I'd gone to a Penn State, which is kind of where I'm from, an IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, or in the case of Georgia, a Kennesaw or a UGA, where you have this kind of built-in college marching band, which is supposed to give you the experience of learning how to teach marching band. But I think we all know that the difference between high school and college marching band is pretty drastic enough that it's not a true dip into doing the thing. It's a related activity that is for sure something that strongly connects, but is not a one-to-one, kind of comparison of like, I'm going to teach my high school band like the Redcoat band. That probably won't go
Right.
so well, or the Marching Owls, or anybody else. And so I
Right.
had a chance to go out and teach a lot there too. So that's really the formative thing of, I didn't want to be an English teacher. Music is something I enjoyed, teaching something I really enjoyed. And when I got to my college, it was like I just got to jump right in, feet first, and start teaching right away, which really lit the fire in me to keep doing this thing.
Well, and I think you brought up a good point, right? In the world when it's not that one to one comparison, I think a lot of people at the high school level, when they're approaching the point where they have to make a decision if they're even going to go to college, period, is or if they can afford to. Let's be real.
Yeah.
The you know some people take their experience that they had with high school and associate that to any band that they would ever go to, whereas in specifically I mean, especially in Illinois, right? You have all the local high school bands, but then they all funnel to the Marching Illini,
Hmm.
which is they're phenomenal, and they have and Barry, their director, he's a great guy.
Oh,
I
Barry
don't.
Hauser is wonderful. Yeah, I really,
It's,
he's,
I could talk to him for weeks.
oh yeah, I could listen to
um,
him like read a phone book. Like he's just great.
and it would be exciting.
It would be. I would enjoy that phone book.
Maybe we should try to get with Barry at some point. Anyway, um, but one thing that definitely doesn't transfer, right? We talked about there's a difference. It's not one to one, and one of
Hmm.
the things, that again you have a lot of extra expertise in is marching techniques and styles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things we kind of wanted to kind of open up the discussion into this, kind of get us down into the rabbit hole. Um, why so if marching band was developed back in 13th century for military purpose and all
Right.
um, why is there a need for different styles? Why did they exist? Where did they come from?
So I can offer a lot of kind of conjecture there, but that is an area of research that is criminally undersubscribed, is the nice way to put it. Like nobody's really talking about it in a scholarly way because it's hard to trace, right? There's a lot of like you kind of peg the 13th century to now, so we're dealing with like
Right.
800 and some odd years of history that we're working through, much of which is not written down. Like nobody's really writing down why we're marching like
Right.
we are. And in a
Right.
lot of ways, the marching that we see now in the modern era of pageantry arts is is something that's arrived to because of differences in performance and differences in aesthetic preference versus a functional need for the most part. So you've got your typical bent leg and straight leg sort of paradigms that exist in DCI and WGI in a lot of ways, in groups that use that sort of thing. Then you'll notice there's a lot more dance now that doesn't look like either of those. Dance is kind of becoming more of a vocabulary that's used more commonly in marching band, specifically high school, but also in drum corps and indoor. So you have that kind of continuum, that kind of like ecosystem there. But then you have things that are like Big Ten style, which is you talk about the Marching Illini, you've got Northwestern, you've got all the like Michigan and Ohio State, and they're all different enough that you could say, well, that's Michigan and that's Ohio State, but they're all similar enough in the way they approach things and how they decide to convey whatever the shapes are, that their style contributes to that, like how they do the thing. So like when Michigan goes out and they make, I think it's like the birthday cake thing at the end of their pregame, and they get there using a high step action, that's actually a factor, an aesthetic factor. Like if we did that, if they did that in the way that like any other band would do, just regular roll step, it wouldn't be nearly as effective. It's the same thing. It comes from that military background, so it's all about precision. And the more things you have moving precision, the more impressive it looks. So I think a lot of the variation we see stems from aesthetic choice and just kind of like things taken to their obvious kind of extreme conclusion. So, for instance, the Cavalier style or the bent leg style, which kind of really started with the Cavaliers in the early 80s, has transitioned to Santa Clara Vanguard's using it now and several other groups, came out of looking at the biomechanics of walking. and going, okay, how do we make that look uniform, and how do we make that look controlled at various tempi? At the same time, in the early 80s, the cadets were coming up with their vocabulary that we see now. There was cadets, and then Star used it, and then variations kind of moved on there, and the right foot lead idea, but also the moving through the heel, which comes from the dance vocabulary of like actually how you move in dance. It comes a lot from that versus articulating all these joints. So there's people had thoughts about I want this for this reason, and then it just kind of grew on itself. It's very organic that way, and that's not even talking about things like the military style marching bands we have here in Texas, which they call traditional. The 6 to 5 marching bands is kind of the way to think about that in terms of function. But then you have the show style bands like HBCU and HBCU adjacent ensembles that kind of take a little bit from a lot of different places and then add their own element to it as well. That again develop because of aesthetic choice, but also because of okay, we start with this and then we just naturally let it progress. It's going to turn into the thing we see now with no sort of rhyme or reason to why, other than A plus B plus C equals Z by the end.
Right, and to kind of sum it all up in my my not as uh, educated brain, um,
Hardly,
is
hardly, Harrison.
is at some point between the 13th century and today,
Yeah,
somebody said, "This is boring. I'm going to do this instead."
basically, that's probably a pretty good way to think about it. And actually, and this, I will do this several times, so you can edit it out if you want to, but I'll mention like there's a great book about this. It's not about marching band, but it's about the way we look at history. It's a book by a guy named David Graeber and David Wengrow, I think his last name is. They're both economists, and one actually David Graeber was he was maybe an anthropologist, or he was in that space. And what he looks at is the development of society. Like, did we go from hunter gatherers to like our current setting, like as an obvious continuum, or were there lots of back and forth and a lot of variation? And what he contends is there's a ton of variation. There was way more going on under the sun than we think there was, but it never got written down, so we don't know it. I think the same sort of thing holds true with the development of marching band. Like we can trace a lot of what we see now to the late 70s, early 80s when we moved from kind of the old school military style to the more expressive kind of abstract style that we see now. And I'll probably in about 10 years, we'll look back and go, yeah, right around 2012, 2013, they started doing more dance stuff. So it even went further there. And so I think you're 100% right. It's just kind of somebody went like, I want to try this, and it stuck, and here we are.
It's
And
actually. Oh, I just wanted to mention that you actually taught me something about the bent leg and straight leg thing. I would assume intuitively they would have start with bent leg because that's how people usually walk, but
Right.
apparently they started with straight leg.
Some people, I mean, it was just, it's again, it's an aesthetic choice. And then like the Blue Devils kind of do something completely different that looks somewhere between the two. And I only hold those up as markers because they were markers when I was learning and marching. I'm sure that things have changed so that you can have a similar sort of conversation using different groups that do similarly different. That sounds weird, but it's true. Similarly different things with the way they move around on the field.
and and I think you brought up another good point is that a lot of places now, especially at the high school level, where at the BOA level, I should say, um, directors at that level are picking and choosing and dividing and a lot of math in deciding on which form they want to use, how they want the foot to move
Mm-hmm.
on the floor, whether it be WGI or on grass on turf. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, there's no. Now that we're talking about it, I really don't think there is a right answer about where it came from because you could go in a million different directions. Um, but I think something to kind of cover just as an opinionated
Mm-hmm.
standpoint from each one of us would be is there one that would be a favorite over the others or something that's
Mm-hmm.
more practical than the other. So and I can kick us off to kind of see where
Mm-hmm.
how we're feeling. For me personally, I love HBCUs, I love Big Ten schools. Chair stepping and high stepping to me seems like an almost unnecessary ab workout, but it looks really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, but on the other hand, I like the bent leg style
Mm-hmm.
because it's easier to teach somebody that one than straight legging, but also it's less fatigue on the body at first,
Hmm.
until you get to a higher level. So for me personally, I think that that bent leg style is probably going to be the better of the three options. However, there's probably a million others that we're not talking about.
There are indeed, I'm sure. What about you, James?
I'm a stickler, I guess, for the old school, just the straight leg, because like when you get that clean, oh boy, like
Mhm.
even you get like company front like movements, and they're all just nailing that movement together. There's just no
Hmm.
better thing, because like you do see that when you're listening, and like I just feel that combination of just amazing sound and just that perfect movement. And I feel like with the bent legged, like while that is the easiest to teach and easiest to learn, like that it just adds a slight extra variability that you may not be able to get 100% clean, which you would be able to do with a straight leg.
Right. And I think you both touched on really important points about the two kind of broad vocabularies, the bent leg, straight leg thing, in that there's a trade off, right? And like Harrison, you kind of mentioned, it's like you like the HBCU thing, you like the bent the chair step, but and it is hard. Like when I taught at University of Washington, I was like, I don't know how you guys do this thing like
I,
that the entire time.
it's
Like
absurd.
it's and like they understood that it was hard. Like the piccolos, because they didn't have flutes in that band, they just had piccolos, like 30 of them. But
It's too many.
they did well. They performed well. They were always like nails, but yeah, it's like there's a lot of piccolos, and they even knew they're like this is ridiculous, but whatever. We get to go to football games; it's fun. But they had a saying, like their little show, like their section shirt every year was like "sexy knees at 90 degrees" because that's like the thing you look for in chair stepping.
Right.
Sometimes I'm like, yeah, the 90 degrees isn't really working, guys. So I don't know how true that shirt is. They didn't like me
Yeah.
on those days, but that is what it is. Um, but like and James, you mentioned like when you get the straight leg stuff clean, how precise it looks and how crisp it looks. So I think everything has a trade-off, right? I think it's the problems that you want to take on, and it makes sense to where your students are as a teacher, but also where your program is developmentally. And so for me, I was opt Harrison, similar to you, to Bentley because it's the system I understand the best. I think it is the easiest to introduce. I think it's the hardest of the two to clean, like to make look uniform, like you mentioned, James. It's just like it can always be a little bit fuzzy, but when it's not, it's absolutely brilliant. But that's a hard thing to get to for high school students. So for me, the marching style is used to be like Harrison. I'm like you. I was like, this is the thing. We're gonna do bent leg, and that's what we do. For no better reason than that's what I'm most familiar with, which is legitimate. I
Hmm.
can teach it better, and that makes a certain sort of sense. But now, in my elderly years, I kind of see that the marching style is a vehicle for what the ensemble needs developmentally, what's going to work for them from what their performances need to look like, but also like where the students are coming from. So like when I got to Kennesaw and worked with you guys, I knew that you knew like the general broad strokes of marching band really well. Like Georgia is a state that does marching band very well, so I could start at a different place with you guys than I could with somebody who's from like a state that isn't as strong. I won't even call it anybody in specific, but there are states that are not as strong as your Georgias and your Indianas and your Illinois and your Texases in terms of in Florida's in terms of marching band. So I would opt for a different thing there. And there it might be what is easiest to get clean versus what is the most sensible vocabulary for the Gesamtkunstwerk, the ultimate art piece of the marching band show they're trying to create.
Right. And to all of that to say that you have not one favorite, you just like them all.
I they're like children. I can't have a favorite. No, I do. I really appreciate the visual technique I was taught at the Cavaliers, which is the bent leg technique, but also and this gets if you want to go further into the weeds, I can go there. I can go all the way down to the roots. Um, this idea that let's say there's an 8 count phrase in some variants of straight leg marching, they do a cheat step on count 8 to ease the transition into the next phrase, and that changes the way the form looks when it finally gets clean. It changes the way the form looks on the transition. It has a slight kind of not even flex to it. It's almost just a little like oozing into the next idea, which is just fine if that's what you want aesthetically. Personally, I like to complete one idea and start a new one. And so, count 8 is in the old direction, count 1 is in the new direction, because that, in my mind, equates to what's happening musically. We want to make sure the phrase ends before we start the next phrase, both musically and visually. So, from a a kind of cross pollination aspect, I think that's the healthiest. But again, if the students aren't ready for that, then that's a pointless exercise. You wouldn't be successful in it, so it's not educationally sound.
And I think that's a good point as well, right? You brought up, transit, making the transition easier from, kind of not necessarily rounding the corner for say, but having the cheat step or the prep step, as some people would call it. um, Especially with going backward, there's still a lot of
Mm-hmm.
bands that'll get up on the toes before they move backward.
Mm-hmm.
um, but with all of that, are you and we've talked about different styles and pivots and relocating the body in the center of mass and moving. Are there techniques that we've talked about or haven't talked about that would be more beneficial physically to someone? Because I know there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of stress that goes into band, and especially for those that aren't used to it. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're new to marching arts, there's a lot of stress that goes on your ankles and your knees.
Yes.
And there's a lot of different ways people try to go about saying, oh, we'll do this and do that. But Dr. Meals, for your professional opinion, is there one way that that you like to talk about transitioning between those steps, or what's less physically taxing?
So, I mean, those are two different questions that have different answers. The first one, the what is my preferred way, my professional opinion, such as it is to make what you're teaching as comprehensive across all domains of performance as you can. You want to have the fewest number of rules to teach the students for them to be successful. So if you can go, hey, we finished all our musical phrases, we finished all our visual phrases, doing the same thing we did all the way before the end of that phrase, then that makes sense. That educationally, to me, that just fits the most nicely together. Now, again, you have to kind of make a judgment about where your kids are, if that's achievable, and adapt from there. But the other, what is less, physically taxing, I'm not sure any of this is. Like, I have a couple students right now that are doctoral students that come from the HBCU world. One went to Bethune-Cookman, the other went to Texas Southern. And they talk about, actually, you guys will remember this. The very first game that Kennesaw ever played was against Edward Waters College.
Yep.
And the guy
Right.
who was the band director there, his name is Kedrick Redding. He is now one of the band directors at Texas Southern, and
Okay.
he is one of our doctoral students at University of Houston. So, like, that little sort of small world
Small
thing was,
world,
I
man.
know, right? Um,
Where we couldn't hear anything because of the flyover.
right, exactly. But then halftime was like, oh, it's a dance team. They're doing the HPC thing. We're like, oh, well, this is okay. We're going to not look as entertaining now, because that's always going to be more entertaining. Twice on Sundays and all day long.
All
But
day long.
all that to say, I think every style has its ability to impact us from a physiological standpoint. So, like, the idea of repetitive stress injuries, like we all know about, like carpal tunnel syndrome from typing too much, but like I have tendonitis in both my shins from marching drum corps all those years. And I'm sure that there are students whose knees are just complete trash by the time they get done with college marching band for a similar reason, no matter the style that they do. I think all of them, because they're repetitive, because we do them an inordinate amount compared to our normal walking, you know, kind of footprint, for, excuse the pun. But like, I think because we do it so much, it's always going to be something that's stressful to our body. To me, then it becomes a question of what is most ergonomically sound. And that's where I get back into the bent leg thing. That just makes the most sense to me from an ergonomic, like biomechanical, but also educational standpoint. But again, I claim my bias. That's what I was raised on. So I might not think that if I had grown up marching in the cadets, or marching in, Madison Scouts, or marching in the Blue Devils or Vanguard back in the 90s. So, I can't say one's the best, but I can tell you my preference.
Yeah, just
Man, that
having
is
that psych degree, I would just say the less mental energy you're spending towards putting your two front feet in
Mm-hmm.
front of you,
Well,
and
and
like spending more time on the music. I think that just makes sense, because yeah, after 8 minutes or 12 minutes, however long your show is, you just want to put it all out there, and as much focus you can put on the actual entertainment for the crowd, the better.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's the idea of cognitive load and all of that too. Like, how much are we asking of ourselves that's novel in these moments, and you want to reduce that as much as possible. Though repeated exposure that we get through rehearsal and performance is going to help that a little bit. You want to
Right.
kind of give that a little bit better chance of taking hold.
and James, I want to ask you a question.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I hadn't forgotten about you.
Oh no, don't worry.
um, because so you did indoor, right?
Correct.
So we talk about we've talked about the repetition and just that is mainly the stressor that people run into when it comes to fatigue and physical stress. Um, what kind of factors that play on for you as somebody did indoor, where it's a much smaller, it's just as much movement, but
Hmm.
it's a smaller area to cover.
Yeah, the area's a lot smaller cover, but I would say the tempos are just always higher in indoor shows, just because we can literally play faster. Because
Hmm.
it's you're playing with your
Right.
hands instead of with your face. Um, but also you have to
What?
realize that certain programs they can't afford as nice floors. So like slippage is a factor, the weight of the floor is a factor, like how old the floor is, because you might be reusing a new old floor from 5 years ago that you just keep paying over and over and over.
Mm,
And then I was somebody who marched woodwind all my life, and then senior year I was like, I'm gonna march indoors, so I marched cymbals. So that you had to learn plie steps, crabbing, a whole different backwards marching style too. So I did end up what's the word? What's the term when you like bend your knee backwards?
Oh,
Hyperextending.
hyperextending.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one. I did that to my knee
Oh.
Wow.
twice that year. And I still feel it to this day, but I don't regret it
Hmm.
because we won Sapa. So I guess in that culty mindset, it's like we won. So, but
You
yeah,
got to
there.
give something to earn something.
Right. So it did take me almost that entire block of when we started camp in, I want to say, end of November up to first competition in February, I want to say. At like half my energy was just spent on, am I actually doing the correct marching technique as opposed to just music? And at least I was a senior at that point, so music at that point, it was like I learn it, and like if I'm moving, I it's just secondhand to play and move at the same time. So that was a really good transition for me. But yeah, you incoming freshmen, don't think that just walking and playing is super easy. Like it does take probably at least a full season for you to be like, yeah, I can move and play and not like spend as much energy as you think you are just moving.
Absolutely. If you've never had to do, oh man, I'm trying to remember an analogy you used, Dr. Meals. Back into
Oh Lord.
my memory's failing me. We had this conversation before we started. I got to hurry up and get older so
Zip.
my memory gets better. Um, oh man. But if you've never tried to juggle while skipping and
Hmm.
trying to rub your stomach at the same time,
Yeah.
you're gonna go cross-eyed, and don't assume walking in you're gonna be phenomenal. You're gonna make mistakes. All of us still make mistakes to this day.
Hmm.
You're never gonna be perfect. And there's not one right way to do it, but listen to your staff, listen to your
Hmm.
leadership. If you are in leadership, don't steer people wrong. um, and set people up for success. Um, which James, you brought up a point about um, how important the floor is and how much of a factor that can play in indoor. And the field for football and outdoor marching band is no different. Marching on a blacktop is a lot different than marching on turf. They're equally as hot. One is softer than the other. Um, but in the same token, turf is completely different from grass, because grass, you're going to have spots that aren't completely flat. You're going to have if you're for your halftime, you're going to have to deal with football players that just dug a hole in the in the,
Hmm.
in the dirt with their cleats. So um, I wanted to bring this point up. I have it here as a discussion point, but I think it'll be very quick. Is wear the right darn shoes.
Hmm.
What are you saying?
uh,
No flip flops? Like, come on. There's always that one person like, nah, I can
Oh
march in
yeah.
flip flops.
I can do it. Yeah.
I can do it. Chacos
Oh wait.
drive me crazy.
At least they're making an attempt at being something appropriate, but
Right.
it's still very far away.
Here's the thing about it though. They're wearing the chacos because they want the chaco tan. they're not
Oh
they're not
yes.
wearing it for support or trying to halfway be
Oh no.
between a sandal and a shoe. They just want the tan lines.
I
Yep.
will
Which
say, lead by example band directors, because my high school band director, every single band camp for basics, he would always show up wearing flip flops, and he's like, "Say, do what I say, not what I do," and then he'd show us how to march in flip flops. So all you band directors out there, just wear darn shoes.
I mean, and there's a certain amount of like I can do this because I put in my time that you have as a band director. It's like I had the sock tan. I still have it actually. Like I'm 42.
It's
I'm
permanent.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
I can. It's like I can tell that hasn't seen a lot of sun down there. But like the idea that do as I say, not as I do, is really appealing because it lets you get away with stuff as a teacher that you couldn't get away with as a student. But to me, that's like a developmental stage. Like we have to move beyond that at some point, or completely own it and make it ridiculous so that it becomes not a moment of cognitive dissonance in the kids. It's a funny thing that a teacher does, and then we just focus on the stuff that's actually important. In this case, learning how to move in the way that you're supposed to. But if I can
Right.
throw in something for any incoming freshmen, whether they be college or high school, the thing to remember is that everyone was a beginner once, and you don't remember what it's like to be a beginner because your brain automatically blocks out negative, like super negative stuff. Like James, with your psychology degree, I'm sure there's formal names for this stuff, but we all know from experience we tend to focus on the positive. We tend to mitigate the negative. In a lot of ways, that's why people have more than one kid because when you're raising them, you forget what it's like from ages 1 to 3, and that's why you want to have more. So something to remember is you will not be good at it at first. And if you are, it's because you're just naturally gifted. So embrace that and enjoy it because it's not going to happen every time you do something new. But if you aren't good at it, that's not a mark that you shouldn't be doing it. It's a mark that you maybe need to ask for help, which is a hard thing to do, but a good step for us all to take. But also, you just need more experience. Like the doing of the thing is what can set you up to be successful more. That's why second years are so much easier than first years in almost everything we do for more than 1 year. So, just a point of advice that I've said many times, and will say many more times: everyone has been a beginner. There's whole fields of religion and philosophy built on this idea of having a beginner's mind and looking at things as new and looking at things as fresh and as ready to be embraced versus, oh, this is something I'm not going to be good at. So that kind of growth mindset versus a fixed mindset is a really helpful thing to bring to the table in an otherwise awkward, new experience.
And also, to that point as well, if you're in a position where you get to work with the incoming freshmen or the first years, if you're going to refer to it that way, um, if you see someone that's having an issue, right? If you're a new leader, there's they don't they're not a bad person because they don't know it. You have to help them a little bit. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but help them to where they're comfortable with you helping them. If it don't make them uncomfortable by helping them.
Right. Don't
Um,
be like, don't want you to just by yourself in front of everyone because you're bad at it. Like, that's probably not the best way to get someone to want to come back on day two.
right. And but spend the extra 5 minutes to re-explain something, or if they're telling you, hey, I just don't understand that I'm supposed to plant my foot and then meet the other foot. I don't this I don't get that. Take the extra 5 minutes and try your best. And if you can't at that point, then try seek help for yourself as well. See if there's
Mm-hmm.
something that you can try to be open minded to offer that feedback and suggestions. And then also people on the receiving end of that, if they're offering you suggestions, they're not mad at you. They're just trying to help you.
There,
Mhm.
exactly. And there's a quote that one of my teachers here at U of H, back when I was a master's student, said. His name's Eddie Green. He's kind of like the OG band director in Texas. One of them. There's several, but he's one of the big ones. But he said, there's no such thing as criticism. It's all information. Nothing I tell you is personal. It's all information to make you a better musician, better whatever we're talking about. I'm trying to make you better. So if it feels personal, remember that I explicitly try to not make it personal. And if it still feels personal, let's talk. But otherwise, just know I'm trying to make you better. And if I'm being direct about it, it's because we don't have a lot of time. And that's really all it boils down to. So, yeah, that's a really good point. Like taking that and extending it too. Everybody's a new leader, is new at being a teacher. And so, just like a beginner when you're marching, you're going to be a beginner teacher. and maybe you're good at it, maybe you're not. But if you're not, asking for help is the surefire way to get better faster.
And I think
And I
like just bringing up the whole, this may not apply to high school necessarily, but there are still people who move in high school. But like in college, there's lots of people that may move from across the country, and the terminology is so very
Oh
different.
yes.
Like just personal story of Dr. Meals, he came in and saying soup to nuts to everything, and everybody's just like, what is going on? Why is this
What does that
man
mean?
right? So like
Why is he talking about
don't
food? Weird.
exactly. So like just don't assume that you know what somebody is saying. Just like ask and like
Mhm.
just try to be as communicative as possible.
Well, then also to the same point, back to Kennesaw, we'll continue the same line. Dr. Meals left, and then we had Dr. Harris,
Mhm.
and Dr. Harris talked about things totally different. And then after Dr. Harris, we had Dr. Shiver, who threw us all for a loop because he came from Iowa. So he started talking in north, south, east, west quadrants. We're used to talking about Waffle House and the transit lot.
Mhm.
So he started talking about that, and the band was incredibly confused. I remember having to sit down with him in the office in the 3305 building and talking to him about, hey, oh yeah, no one knows that.
Nobody knows what
uh,
north is. What are you talking about?
I was like, if it's side one, you're gonna call it look to Waffle House.
Hmm.
If it's side two, you're gonna call it look at the transit lot, and that didn't work. I tried to. It's and in hindsight, that I sat there as a drum major trying to tell a doctorate how to explain a marching band. So I realize how rude that is now.
Well, it's not rude though. I mean, I think even any of your instructors would be like, oh, I'm. It's hard because we're hardwired to think about certain things certain ways. I'll be honest, like I grew up in Pennsylvania where the roads aren't, so like this idea of cardinal directions really didn't make sense to me because we were following old cow paths and old like stream beds, and that's what the way our roads were set up. Georgia's similar. It's like there's not a lot of like grids, but if you ever drive through like Iowa or Nebraska, they are still counting like 143rd Street, 30 miles outside of Des Moines. Like there's nobody out there, but it's 143rd Street. So like that idea of a grid makes so much more sense. So it's contextual. I think you're 100% right. And like when I was teaching in Texas, we'd be like at Waller, the last school I taught high school band at. Like one way was like face Bucky's, which is like our giant. You guys have them now in Georgia.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
They hadn't
oh
built it yet.
man.
We knew it was coming, so that's where you look was Bucky's, and then you look at the football stadium the other way. To the point, though, that when I wrote for the University of Michigan for a couple of years, because my friend John Pasquale, he's the athletic finance guy there, and he's fantastic. They have a very specific system they use, similar to what you talk about, where it's like I think side one is like White House, and side two is some other word that's like distinctive to their rehearsal field. And they actually want you to go into Pieware and put those designations on the coordinate sheets the students receive because that's what they
Amazing.
know. And I was like, okay, I'll just do what you tell me to. But like that sort of thing can be enshrined that way, and that's totally legitimate. But again, it's understanding, reading the room, and knowing like, okay, I'm going to adapt what I do and meet you halfway, or you're going to do this because it's really not that big of a deal.
Oh, I can't wait to read the comment section to see how many people are like, y'all are crazy. We just use cardinal directions, and everybody else is piling in like, what are you talking about?
Right, and there's this whole thing of like it's the soda versus pop versus Coke conversation, just writ large, right? We all
Yeah.
call it something different. So it's just a question of where do you come from, and that can probably tell us a little bit about what you might call some marching band stuff. People from Iowa clearly use cardinal directions, which is
And
effective and efficient if you know what they are and how that
Right.
works.
well, then, so we're talking about cardinal directions and all. Do we spend enough time in basic block? Is basic block is there enough time in the
Million
world
dollar
to train
question. I mean,
to train?
this is something that I don't think anyone's quite figured out yet. I think there are some people that have like a pretty good idea of how it works with their kids, but as a general rule, I don't know. I don't think there is enough time that you can spend in basic block, but I also don't think there's enough time you can spend applying those skills in basic block to something more complex, which is the drill or whatever we're doing. And so I think it's finding that shifting balance of like at the beginning we're just spending more time working on fundamentals and then really focus on applying them. And over time, we do less of the fundamentals and we do more of the application until it comes to, okay, you just need a reminder about what the fundamentals are. And the rest is application because you've done it so much, you don't know how not to do it wrong.
Yeah.
So, I think there's probably a formula in there that looks a lot like a lot of other motor learning paradigms, but I don't think anyone's quite cracked it to like on day 47 we're doing 36% this and blah blah blah. I don't think anyone's quite there yet.
I mean, people hate basic block,
And see, I
you
love
know,
it. Like I love like ensemble fundamentals, like when we're doing like music stuff. Like I love
Okay.
daily drills, what we call it here in Texas. But I also love basics block because you get to work on the skills and make them so good in such a focused way that to me that's almost meditative in a lot
Do
of
you,
ways.
do you
Like you
love
get to just
do you love teaching them, or do you like actually marching in the basic block?
honestly both. Like
Oh,
honestly, like
okay.
I was a big fan of the drill downs when I was in high school. We used to do a thing. I think I made you guys do it once or twice when I was at Kennesaw, Diamond Basics, where like you go
yeah.
four people to a hash. It's kind of brutal, but I didn't love it at the end. Like I didn't love it when we were an hour in and I was tired, but I did see the value in it because like everything we do makes sense to something that's going on in the show or some like a skill we need to develop more to make this easier. So I saw it as a lot of like, I'm going to dig in here so that I can see the rewards later. But by no means was it like something I woke up on every day and was like, I'm really excited to do basics today. Not really often, no. But I did see the value in it. So I guess for a 17-year-old to be that way is not bad. But yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, when I started, I thought basic block was a crime.
Oh, totally.
But then as I got into college, I was like, I get it.
It's like it's a thing.
I gotta
We need to
do
do
it.
more of it.
People get sloppy.
Man, you aren't kidding.
I don't know. I like to say that like I think our first ever parade at KSU, I still started on the right foot instead of my left foot, and somebody else had called me out. Never mind being in leadership, and never mind doing marching band for
Eh.
like 5 years at that point. So that was funny. But I guess like just a personal rule in life is then like always spend 20 minutes on something, and like after that 20 minutes, you're just gonna start to see a very noticeable degradation. So if
Mhm.
it's like work and you're working on a project, just spend 20 minutes and then like take 3 minutes to close your eyes or just do something completely different, because
Mhm.
that 20 minutes seems to be like that that magic time for efficiency.
Right. Like we've kind of got that area of focal attention that we actually get
Right.
something out of, and then you hit that point of diminishing returns real quick afterwards. It's almost like it's kind of a variant of the Pomodoro technique, if you're familiar with that. Like where you set up like it was literally a I think it started out in Italy as a tomato based timer, which is what it's called Pomodoro, like the kitchen timer
Oh,
of
okay.
25 minutes, and it was shaped like a tomato. And they would just turn it 25 minutes. You work 25 minutes, you take a 5 minute break, you do that over and over again. There's a decent amount of support for that being a good productivity paradigm because, like you said, James, you kind of cut the green wire on the 20 minutes of my brain turns to tapioca by putting that break in the middle, and then you can get more done over a long period of time.
Tapioca's good.
Oh, tapioca is delicious, except when it's in my brain. Then it's not good.
It's not great. Um, so to kind of push us along here to for you as an individual, so in your seasoned career as
Make it sound
and
like steak.
hey, steak's good too, man.
Steak is good.
And you're in Texas, so I don't want to
I
hear it. I don't want to hear about it.
I have two 12-pound briskets in the freezer along with a pork roast and some ribs. So yeah, I'm in good shape over here.
Come on, I already had dinner. Don't make me have second dinner.
I mean, temptation is a wonderful thing, James.
Just don't turn your brain to tapioca.
Yes.
For you personally, if you can think of one, what is your biggest embarrassment for your marching career?
Biggest. That's the tricky part because there's a lot of embarrassing things.
Or just one that sticks out.
Um, so there's two, and they kind of bookend my drum corps experience. Um, Actually, there's three, and they actually do. They bookend, midpoint, and end my drum corps experience. So when I was starting out in the Lake Erie Regiment, a little bitty drum corps in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is as small as it sounds, I made the mistake of wearing silk boxers once, doing all their Saturday drill rehearsal. I was like 16. I didn't know. I learned very quickly that was a bad idea. So that's
I'm
kind of
already in
embarrassing
pain.
point number one. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was the 90s, so like silk boxers were a thing. I don't know why. I was also in Western Pennsylvania where like trends are about 10 years behind everywhere else, so that wasn't helping things either. So that's kind of embarrassing point number one. That's flag post uno. In the middle, in 1997, my first year marching the Cavaliers, we had a actually no, it was 1998. Actually, two things: 97 and 98. I have a story for each. 97, we had it was a 7-4 section in the closer of the Firebird. That was the show that year. So the kind of the finale, the beam bum bum beam bum bum beam bum bum, that whole like end of the Firebird suite. There was a move where I was in the front of a line that was going from a diagonal facing this way to a diagonal facing this way. So it was just kind of flipping and orienting itself. I was going backwards across the front of the field, like 4 steps around the front sideline, from a yard line to splitting the next yard line. So it's bigger than a 7-5, more like a 6-5. Backwards, fast in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is one of the oldest, most august drum corps stadiums, but also the absolute worst trash grass by the time we got there ever. J. Bernie Crumb is the name of the stadium, and she is fickle. She will rob you blind if you let her. And so I fell. I just like legs went out underneath me, went horizontal to the ground, bam, in Allentown in front of everyone. So I was super embarrassed. Fast forward the next year, we're in, I think it was Terre Haute, Indiana, or somewhere in that part of the state. We had a move where we had a diamond that every other line went back, and they call it the trickle down. Basically, the second to last row goes behind and basically turns a diamond into a triangle that's moving forward. It's one of those old classic like Steve Brubaker Cavaliers moves, and that was going at about 184. And I was surrounded by like sousaphone or contras at that point, and I had like a little mellophone, and I just like bit it. But I had contras running at me backwards. So I was like scrambling on my back, looking like a turtle. And that was 1998. Fortunately, not in Allentown, but still embarrassing. Fast forward to 2000. And it was finals. It was in College Park, Maryland. And there's at the beginning of the second movement for the show that year, we rippled out of the closing set of the opener and had to kind of land on a spot, like did a little ailey twerk thing and then landed on the spot. For whatever reason, my center of gravity was off. And so you can see me on the video. They're panning by as this happens. Like we were supposed to start waving back and forth to look like seaweed because it was Niagara Falls. I don't know if it actually worked, but that's what we were told to do. And I waved too hard. And like you can see my leg go, and then come back. And I'm just like, oh. And then what I do when we have another move that's like a body move, I'm about 2 steps out of my spot too. So I like take a giant step back and another giant step back and fix myself. But again, embarrassing because it's finals, it's DCI. If I hadn't done that, maybe we wouldn't have tied with the cadets. I don't know.
Oh, we'll never know. We'll have to check the multiverse.
We will. We'll have to look. We'll have to go ask Stephen Strange to open things up for us and let us look around.
Or YouTube.
Also that too.
All right. So with that said, you got any plugs for us? Any plugs for yourself or any mentors you want to show out?
Plugs. I mean, I'll be honest. Like the marching band thing, my contention is anyone that is really familiar with one kind of marching band needs to go out and learn about a different one. So if like you're in the Atlanta area, you don't go to the Honda and you're not from the HBCU, you're missing out on a massive opportunity to learn more about this broad thing, this culture that is marching band. Same thing if you're HBCU and you've never seen a BOA show or never seen DCI, you need to go check that out because they're doing really good things. It's not the same as what you do, but that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. There's nothing good or bad under heaven. It's thinking that makes it so, and that's the way we need to approach the world. I think because the one thing that we're seeing is our country. I mean, not to get too grand, but we see more divisions than we see unifying agents. And the one thing we know about marching band is that it's a culture unto itself. It has norms, it has expectations, it has, as a very smart scholar says, a collection of social acts and social facts that define it. But if you put like an HBCU person in, like, let's say take someone from Morehouse and put them in the band at Kennesaw, they'll go, okay, this is band, but it's a very different band than I'm used to. And same vice versa. So not that you should go out and like try and learn someone else's, but you need to be aware of it. You need to be a fan of it because it's entertaining. It's just different. And so that'd be my contention. Anyone who knows one thing really, really well needs to go see something that is the diametric opposite and appreciate the differences, but also the similarities. Um, but the other thing too is just keep doing it. Like the one thing we know about marching bands is that they are the largest, and this is something that I've not seen disproven. They are the largest recurrent ensemble that exists in all of music in the world. So everything else that's
Wow.
bigger than that tends to be like a festival. Like you see these videos out of some kind of Eastern European countries that have a very strong choral tradition. About 1,000 people in an auditorium singing, but that's not something they do every year. It's like a one-off kind of festival thing. Whereas a marching band, it's like we do this every year. We have, like, if you're in the case of Allen High School here in Texas, you have 750 kids in the marching band every year, if not more. And so, this idea that we're in this organization that is committed to creating something that is unified for many is interesting. That we have this organization that is a social nexus unto itself is interesting. And that we have this way of understanding how to operate in groups and on teams that is a very non direct way of doing that is hugely valuable in our current setting of remote work and coming back to the office and like not remembering how to be in society anymore. I don't know if you guys experience this in Georgia, but we're experiencing in Hardin, Texas. We're finally out of the survival part of the pandemic, and we're starting to get into the how do we deal with all the stuff that happened. And a lot of us just don't remember how to be in society. We don't remember how to be in groups anymore. And things like marching bands specifically, but music generally, are a beautiful gateway into that. That is just an easy thing to cross for us as performers, but also as people, because it taps into the things we do and value naturally as human beings.
All right, thank you, Dr. Meals, so much for joining us on this podcast today. I think your information slash, just the way you talk is just so smooth and charming. I don't know, like anybody could listen to it for hours on end, but sadly, we'll end our call here today. So again, this has been Dr. Meals with the University of Houston talking with us on the Marching Arts Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on all of our socials at the Marching Arts Pod. That's POD. It's on all of our socials, so Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, the list goes on and on. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and this has been the Marching Arts Podcast, your guide to all things marching.